After Jesus and the disciples had passed the withered fig tree, they went on to the temple. Jesus, as had always been his practice, began to engage with the crowds who were gathering for the Passover festival. There would be many curious people there, wondering if he was going to show his anger at the merchants and moneylenders again. But today is a day of spurious argument as the chief priests and other Pharisees and Sadducees try to catch Jesus out and find a way to arrest him. They arrived again in Jerusalem, and while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders came to him. "By what authority are you doing these things?" they asked. "And who gave you authority to do this?" Jesus replied, "I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin? Tell me." They discussed it among themselves and said, "If we say from heaven, he will ask, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say of human origin," they feared the people, for everyone held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, "We don't know." Jesus said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." Then the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. "Teacher," they said, "Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first one married and died without leaving any children. The second one married the widow, but he also died, leaving no child. It was the same with the third. In fact, none of the 7 left any children. Last of all, the woman died too. At the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since the 7 were married to her?" Jesus replied, "Are you not in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God? When the dead rise, they will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven."
What pictures do the 2 previous readings conjure up for you? Probably the traditional ones that we know from illustrations since childhood. Jesus sitting on the ground or standing talking to a group of men. Yes, I said men. If I told you that women were Pharisees and Sadducees too, would you be surprised? If I told you that in the 1st century AD, women held equal status with men when they were in the temple, and they could access the same areas that men could, would that surprise you? There was no segregation of sexes in the temple areas at the time of Jesus. In the centuries that followed, there was strict division of the sanctuary into male and female areas, but not when Jesus visited. The temple area known as the women's court was where most of the public discussion took place. It was where the house of learning was situated. So, when Jesus sat down and began to teach, the crowd that surrounded him would include women. It was just as likely that some of these trick questions came from women as they did from men. Women who sat in front of Jesus and challenged him. They may even have broken with tradition and asked their question directly, rather than telling their husbands what to ask on their behalf, as it was only during worship that women were forbidden to speak. Women were used to having authority and being listened to by those around them, especially the wives of Sadducees, whose husbands were the temple priests and elders. Equally, it was just as likely that the women around Jesus, his female disciples and friends, would be used to asking questions and would expect to be treated with the same respect when they did. We don't hear that voice as often as we should in the New Testament, principally because the conversations and thoughts that are captured are those of men who were with Jesus. That doesn't mean that those female conversations didn't take place. In some sense, The male voice has become a stumbling block to our interpretation of the role of women that were with Jesus.
He called me a rock, and then a stumbling block. What do I do now? First there was that question out of the blue. Who do people say the Son of Man is? An academic kind of question, not touching us directly. We told him what we'd heard folk say. Then he looked me straight in the eye. And you? Who do you say I am? And I came straight back. It's my way, though I'm still not sure if they were my words. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And he called me a rock. He called me Peter the Rock, and said, on this rock I will build my church. And while I was still taking that in, he began to talk about it all coming to an end, before it had really begun. Such an end I didn't want to imagine. I caught his arm and shouted, Heaven forbid! This can't happen, I won't let it. Then he spun round, looked me straight in the eye and called me a stumbling block.
There are many stumbling blocks in the Bible, and one of them is the male voice that runs throughout much of the text. That doesn't make the content invalid, but it does mask the key roles played by women throughout Jesus' ministry. As this week progresses, we'll explore the resilience of the large number of women who stayed with Jesus right through his trials, up to his death and beyond. Join us tomorrow when we go once again to Bethany.